Welcome to This Explainer. Right off the bat, I want to completely challenge everything you think you know about how money actually works. You know, when you reach into your pocket, check your banking app, or just tap your card, you're interacting with this highly modernized digital system. And we're just so used to this, right? We often kind of assume that money was invented by some central bank or maybe some government guys in a fancy boardroom. But to truly understand what gives money its actual value today, we have to look backward, like way backward. We need to strip away the digital screens, forget about the paper notes and the metal coins, and look at how humans, at a fundamental level, decide what carries value.
Because for most of human history, money wasn't digital, and it definitely wasn't paper. On the island of Yap in Micronesia, it took the form of massive, and I mean literally massive, limestone wheels weighing up to 4 metric tons. Just picture that for a second. 4 metric tons. These are called rye stones. We are definitely not talking about something you can just slide into your wallet. Some of these stones were actually taller than a full-grown person, and incredibly difficult to even nudge, let alone transport.
So this brings us to a really fascinating mystery. Why on earth would anyone accept something so incredibly heavy, so completely impractical, in exchange for goods and services? I mean, think about it. If you offered to buy my house today with a literal 4-ton boulder, I probably think you were joking. No way. Yet for the Yap Islanders, this was a highly functioning, deeply respected economic system. So why exactly did these giant rye stones become money? Well, the answer to that specific question reveals the absolute core of what makes any currency, even the dollars or euros sitting in your bank account right now, actually work.
Section 1. The rules of the game. What makes good money? To solve this mystery of Yap Island and why these stones became money, we first need to understand how humans naturally move away from barter and kind of converge on a single medium of exchange. Because direct barter, it was a nightmare. If I have apples and I really want some shoes, I have to go find a cobbler who specifically wants apples on that exact day. The crucial rule to solving this whole mess is something called salability. Basically, if nobody wants your valuable item, it makes for terrible money because you can't easily carry your purchasing power across time, space, or different sizes of transactions. Let's break that down. Think of salability across time. If you get paid in fresh fruit, well, that wealth just literally rots in a week. Terrible salability across time. Salability across space means you can move your wealth easily from one city to another without, needing a massive fleet of trucks. And salability across scale, that just means you can buy a huge estate or just a tiny cup of coffee using the exact same system. Good money absolutely needs to excel at these dimensions.
Now, when we compare primitive monies across these specific dimensions, something super fascinating emerges. Look at this breakdown. Cattle and shells had some pretty serious limitations, but at first glance, rye stones seem to just totally fail on space and scale. I mean, look at cattle first. Sure, they hold value over time pretty well, but you actually have to feed them, you can't easily transport a whole herd across the country, and you certainly can't pay for a loaf of bread with a fraction of a cow, right? Seashells are definitely better for carrying around, but they aren't perfectly standardized. And then, look at the rye stones. Okay, they are very durable, for sure, high marks there. But they are completely unmovable, so salability across space is very low. And you can't exactly snap a piece off to buy a small fish, so scale is low too. By all conventional logic, they should have been terrible money.
Which leads us to Section 2, the secret of the stones. Let's look at why unmovable money actually worked perfectly.
The real secret here lies in exactly where these stones came from. See, limestone was not naturally available on the island of Yap. Not at all. Because they had to use boats and coordinate massive amounts of physical labor to bring them from entirely different islands, sometimes even risking their lives on dangerous ocean voyages, they achieved the ultimate absolute goal of money, absolute scarcity. Anyone could go pick up a stick or a regular rock on the beach, but nobody is accidentally carving and sailing a 4-ton boulder over the weekend. The sheer difficulty, the time, and the intense human energy required to bring just one of these stones into the local economy meant that the supply of this money was strictly, inherently limited. It was incredibly hard to inflate, and that is a huge part of why they became trusted as money in the first place.
And this brilliant setup illustrates exactly how you go about spending a 4-ton stone without actually moving it. The physical object just stays put, while the community ledger simply updates. The islanders realized something incredibly smart. If everyone in the village collectively agrees on who owns which stone, the stone literally never actually has to move. It's genius. If I want to buy your property, we just announce to the entire community that the giant stone sitting up on that hill over there now belongs to you. The physical reality stays exactly the same, it doesn't budge an inch, but the ownership record in the minds of this decentralized community officially changes hands. It's a beautifully elegant, almost entirely mental ledger system that is perfectly backed by intense physical scarcity.
Section 3. The threat of easy money. What happens when technology destroys scarcity?
You see, this entire system relies on one incredibly fragile assumption, that the monetary good will always remain difficult to acquire. But as we know, human history is completely defined by technological leaps, and technology fundamentally changes how difficult things are to make. If a new invention makes a previously scarce object incredibly easy to produce, well, it transitions from being reliable hard money into very vulnerable easy money, and that completely destroys its monetary value. Hard money, much like the rye stones were initially, is characterized by very slow supply growth. It naturally protects your wealth because literally nobody can just instantly print more of it. Easy money, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. If someone discovers a clever way to cheaply mass-produce your currency, they can quickly flood the market. And when the supply spikes like that, the value of every single existing unit just plummets.
We actually saw this exact thing happen in West Africa. For generations, these very rare, locally produced glass beads functioned perfectly as money. Why? Because they were scarce. They were hard money. But when European explorers arrived and introduced advanced industrialized glassmaking technology, they quickly realized they could churn out millions of similar beads for almost zero effort. So they imported massive ships full of these mass-produced beads, basically artificially inflating the local money supply. The result was devastating. The people holding the original beads completely lost their purchasing power, and the beads entirely lost their status as money. Almost overnight, technology completely destroyed their scarcity.
Moving on to Section 4, the stock-to-flow ratio. Let's look at the actual math behind monetary hardness.
Now, to mathematically measure this exact vulnerability, we have to look at the relationship between what already exists and what is currently being made. Like, how do we objectively figure out if something is hard money, like a rye stone used to be, or easy money, like those mass-produced glass beads? Well, we use a specific metric called the stock-to-flow ratio. I know, it sounds like dry economic jargon, but it's actually remarkably simple. Basically, stock is just the current total supply of the asset that's already sitting around in the world, and flow is just how much brand new supply is being created and added to that pile, usually measured over the course of a year. So by simply dividing the stock by the flow, we get a very clear number that tells us exactly how fast the supply is inflating. Think about it like this. If your flow of new supply is huge compared to your existing stock, your money is incredibly easy to inflate. If we break down the math on this slide, it becomes super clear. If you have a high stock with a low flow, say 1,000 units sitting around and only 10 new units can be made a year, your wealth is incredibly safe. That's a high stock-to-flow ratio. That's hard money. But if you have low stock and high flow, where someone can suddenly produce 500 new units a year on top of those 1,000 existing ones, that's easy money, and your existing units are going to lose their purchasing power incredibly fast, because high flow means the total supply can grow rapidly, destroying value. Over thousands of years of painful trial and error, humanity slowly abandoned shells, beads, and even those giant limestone wheels for this exact reason. We moved toward metals like gold specifically because gold is nearly indestructible and, historically speaking, insanely difficult to mine in large quantities. It has a great stock-to-flow ratio.
Which brings us to Section 5, from stones to Bitcoin, a modern answer to an ancient question. This actually brings us to a really surprising connection between those ancient limestone wheels and modern cryptocurrency. Now, I know it might seem like a massive, kind of crazy leap to go from wooden boats carrying rocks to digital computer code, but both the Yap Islanders and modern computer scientists were actually trying to answer the exact same fundamental monetary question. And that question is, how do you create a system that everyone trusts to track ownership while simultaneously making absolutely sure that nobody, no king, no explorer with fancy glassmaking tools, and no central bank can easily manipulate or inflate the supply?
It is honestly fascinating when you compare them side by side. While Bitcoin is entirely digital and rye stones are incredibly physical, both use extreme production difficulty to guarantee their scarcity. And, even more interestingly, both rely on a decentralized network or community ledger rather than a centralized bank to verify who owns what. The rye stones derive their high stock-to-flow ratio from the intense physical danger, the cost, and the energy required to sail across the ocean just to mine limestone.
On the flip side, Bitcoin derives its high stock-to-flow ratio from digital proof of work, which literally requires massive amounts of computing power and electricity to solve complex cryptographic rules just to release a new coin. And just like the Yap community shouted out who owned the stone while the physical rock stayed safely put, the Bitcoin network broadcasts ownership changes across thousands of global computers, while the digital coins themselves remain safely locked in the underlying protocol.
So as you look at our modern era, an era of rapidly printing fiat currency, we really have to stop and ask ourselves, are we actually using hard money today, or are we just carrying around the modern equivalent of easily manufactured glass beads? The whole story of the unmoving money on Yap Island isn't just some quirky historical anecdote. It's actually a powerful lens through which we can judge our own wealth today. If the money you rely on to survive can be created effortlessly out of thin air, history shows us exactly what eventually happens to its value. So take a hard look at the stock-to-flow ratio of your own bank account's currency and ask yourself a serious question: just how